Hey guys, Blade the Striker here. Today I will be showing you guys how to play and build Jinx, the loose cannon. Jinx is a very simplistic ADC to understand. However, if you can master her mechanics and positioning, you can single-handedly take over an entire game. And this can be done from any elo. I will start with a summary and list of scalings of Jinx's abilities, so if you wish to skip past her basic abilities then click the annotation on the screen. Credits of the summary and scaling pictures goes to the low wiki. Starting with Jinx's passive, Get Excited, it reads, whenever an enemy champion or structure that Jinx has dealt damage to within the last 3 seconds is killed or destroyed, she gains 175% movement speed that decays over 4 seconds. So this is basically a free escape tool when getting kills and turrets. And this means that you can go a little more ham when trying to destroy turrets as you have a free speed up to easily get away. Jinx's Q Switcheroo, Toggle Pow Pow reads, Jinx's basic abilities grant bonus attack speed for 2.5 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, with the first stack granting twice as much attack speed. The stacks decay one at a time when she stops attacking. Fishbones, the rocket launcher, will not clear any active stacks, but they will not grant attack speed after her first attack. Toggle Fishbones. Jinx, at the cost of 20 mana per attack, gains bonus attack range, also dealing 10% AD bonus damage and making her basic attack Splash. The Splash deals full damage to all enemies in a 150 radius area, and the bonus damage to her target and the Splash both scale additively with critical strikes. So with her default Q, you get more attack speed per auto attack, stacking up to 3 times. When toggled on, your range increases by a scaling amount depending on the Q rank, and does 100% damage to enemies and does AoE damage. This can also critically strike as this counts as an auto attack still, not an ability. Jinx's W, Zap, reads, after a short delay, Jinx fires a shock blast that deals physical damage to the first enemy hit, granting sight and slow icons, slowing the unit for 2 seconds. This is basically a very thin skill shot that takes a second to ramp up, but does a good amount of damage as it scales with 140% of Jinx's AD, and also slows and reveals the target hit. Jinx's E, Flame Chompers, reads, Jinx tosses out 3 chompers that, after a 0.7 seconds arm time, explode on contact with enemy champions, dealing magic damage over 1.5 seconds to enemies within 50 unit area. The champion that sets off the chomper is also rooted the same duration. Chompers explode automatically after 5 seconds. A single champion can only set off a single chomper, but can be damaged if they remain in range when they explode. This is Jinx's main CC tool when in teamfights. Throw these bad boys down in the middle of a fight and the enemies won't see it coming and get rooted. Also good to follow up with CC like a Thresh Hook, and good for zoning small skirmish and objective points. Finally we have Jinx's R, Super Mega Death Rocket, which reads, Jinx fires a rocket that travels in a line, exploding on a 225 range area around the first enemy champion hit. The primary target of the explosion takes full damage, while nearby enemies take 80% of the total damage. Enemies caught in the explosion take physical damage equal to a base amount, plus a percentage of their missing health, with a max of 300 damage versus minions and monsters. The base amount of damage increases by 1% per 15 units the rocket travels over the first second, for a maximum of 100% bonus damage, 200% total damage, and the missing health component is individually taken by the targets. This is Jinx's AoE execute and does a very good job at that. It does 25, 30, 35% of the enemy's missing health scaling with ability level, along with a flat AD ratio and scales with Jinx's bonus AD. The farther away you shoot it from, the more damage it'll do when it hits, similar to an Ashe ult and the stun duration. Now on to the runes and masteries. The mastery shown on screen is the most frequent mastery page used for Jinx, and for good reason. It is a very common mastery page for any ADC, but since Jinx doesn't rely on abilities as much as auto attacks, you don't need to put points into Blade and spell weaving. The runes are also quite common and used on basically any ADC. AD reds are good for the early game damage, flat MR blues are really good to help Jinx survive the early game, and scalings aren't really that needed on her, as she has a tougher time surviving in the early game than late. Armor yellows for less harass from the enemy ADC and all around good yellows. And then attack speed quints as they synergize with Jinx's Q very well and are also quite standard on most AD carries. Once in game you should really always have the standard ability route. You should always max your Q, W, then E in that order, of course taking points into your R whenever you can. Jinx can sometimes have a rough laning phase, but that's even more of an incentive to max Q first as it gives more range for safer farming and safer harass. You also always want to make sure to put a point into your E before level 6, especially if you can pull a CC combo with someone like a Morgana, Blitzcrank, Thresh, Nautilus, or any others of the sort. You'll want to max your W second as it's great for poking and sieging in the mid to late game, and since it scales with AD, it will always be relevant. There would be no real reason to max E at any stage of the game other than the last ability to max, unless you're going AP Jinx. Her E scales with 100% AP, so I guess you could say it's viable, but please don't do it in my solo queue games. Anyways, Jinx build order will be the same for the most part, but you can switch up some items and build them earlier later into the game, depending on the enemy's team comp. The most frequent build order would be Infinity Edge, Berserker Greaves, Phantom Dancer, Last Whisper, Bloodthirster, and Guardian Angel. However, do not follow this build path 100% of the time. Some instances of switching up your build would be versus a team that has a tanky jungler or top laner. If they're stacking health and have a lot of it, but little armor, then push the Last Whisper down an item and build a Blade of the Ruined King over a Bloodthirster. If they have a lot of health, Bloodthirster won't do as much once they get armor. You'll be rendered quite useless. Blade of the Ruined King percent of current health does quite a bit more damage than you would expect versus health tanks, and it is always recommended when they have 2 or more people on their team that have 2,500 health by 20 minutes or something ridiculous like that. Phantom Dancer can also be switched out for Static Shiv, depending on 2 things. If you are behind, then pick up a Static Shiv as it's a little cheaper and gives you a quicker power spike and better mid game, although late game Phantom Dancer is always better. Also pick up a Shiv if you are getting sieged quite often and your team has no wave clear, as the AoE Shiv damage that can crit is amazing to hold off the enemies. Paired with your bonus Q range, it makes for pretty safe wave clear. Guardian Angel can also be switched out for Banshee's Veil or Quicksilver Sash, but I personally like Guardian Angel in solo queue. The reason being is that when you see an AD carry that has a GA, there's a less of an incentive to focus them in teamfights as they can just revive. It adds a scare factor to you, and even though it isn't true to just completely ignore you, people will do that anyways, as they see no point in killing you as you'll just revive and lifesteal with your Blade of the Ruined King or Bloodthirster. In conclusion, build orders are completely situational, but there is a standard that you should try to follow, but be keen about switching it up as it can make or break a game. In the laning phase, your main objective will be to farm. Some snowball AD carries like Draven will want to try to get kills early on, and of course Jinx is a fantastic snowball AD carry that can take over a game, but it's more difficult to do. If you have a support who can follow up with chompers for a chain CC like a Morgbind or Thresh Hook, then that's acceptable to try to zone or go for kills. But if you have a Soraka or some other passive support, then your goal should be just to farm. Jinx scales incredibly well into the late game, only getting better and better from the beginning of the game. Kills definitely snowball Jinx very far ahead, but it's also risky as dying can really put a Jinx behind. So that's why I say focus on farm. It's the safer route to being relevant all throughout the game, and rely on bad positioning of the enemy team in teamfights in the mid game to get yourself snowballing into the late game. Other than that though, just use Q to farm safely, but don't spam it as it uses 20 mana per auto attack, and her mana pool is quite small in the early game. Try to harass and deny farm of the enemy when you can, because as I talked about in an earlier video, as long as you are ahead of your enemy later in gold, then you're doing your job well. There's no need to make risky plays as Jinx, just farm, and even though it sometimes can be boring to do, I promise it won't be so boring when you crit the enemy AD carry for half their health in the late game. As a side note, make sure to always ward. Even though Jinx is fantastic at farming and zoning, she has zero escape unless you get a kill, which is highly unlikely while the enemy jungler ganks you. Be aware of your positioning because your base movement speed is low, and it can be as simple as one misposition to lose control of the game as Jinx. In the mid game, you want to try to force some objective fights and siege. Jinx is very good at sieging and team fighting with her AoE autos, W for siege, and chompers for objective control. Her E is similar to a Ziggsy in the sense that it can completely turn off enemies from going through a choke point, because getting caught in her trap can easily result in their death. Hopefully during the mid game, you should have Infinity Edge, Tier 2 boots, and maybe a Shiv or Phantom Dancer completed. This is around the time where you want to be thinking about buying a Blade of the Ruined King, Last Whisper, or Bloodthirster next. Remember, Blade of the Ruined King if they have a lot of health, Last Whisper if they have a lot of armor, or Bloodthirster if you are super fed and they have no real tank threat. In the mid game, always stay behind your teammates. You should not be trying to engage fights, however be a main threat during fights. Always toggle your Q to the increased range as it increases your chances of safety, does more damage, and does AoE. However, if an enemy dives on top of you, it is a very good idea to change to your normal Q as you will always dish out more DPS to a single target. Remember that. So if a Zed jumps to you, switch to your normal Q as you'll have a much higher chance of beating him with the more attack speed, because it seriously does make a difference in 1v1s. If you get caught out in the mid game, not only do you have no chance of survival, but you will more than likely lose an objective. Same can basically be said for any champion, but as Jinx you need to be cautious of your positioning as she has no real escape other than her flash. So keep in mind to always stay behind your teammates, try to ping for objectives if you think you're strong enough, and make sure to keep a keen eye on your positioning, as it can easily change a game around either in your favor or the enemy team's. The late game is very similar to the mid game, but this is where you completely shine. You should have around 5 to 6 items completed, and you'll absolutely destroy anything that stands in your path. No matter what their front line is, you can destroy them as long as you have your Last Whisper or Blade of the Ruined King. Again, always make sure to toggle your Q on if they are clumped and you have a good range advantage on them, and use your default Q to do more DPS to a single target that is up in your face. You need to be safe, because even though you're a walking machine gun, you can be blown up easily. Stay with teammates and be sure to always have a defensive item, even if it's not a GA. As long as you have something that can help keep you alive a little longer, it's better to have that safety net to fall back onto in case you make a small misstep. That's about everything you need to know about Jinx. I know this guide was quite a long guide, but I structured it similar to my Orianna guide I created in the past. Jinx is an insanely powerful AD carry, classified as a hyper carry, and if you can position yourself correctly, you can completely dominate every game you get into. This is why Jinx is classified as a hyper carry. She's one of the few champions left in the game that if snowballs with just a few kills can easily carry a game as long as you optimize your DPS and play smart overall. Thank you guys so much for watching, I seriously appreciate it. I put a lot of time and effort into making these guides, so if you enjoy them then please give the video a like or leave a comment down below. If you have any other champions that you want a guide created on, then please let me know and I'll gladly create a guide for them. And I'm not restricted to any role, so feel free to give a guide on any champion. Thanks again for watching, and go get yourself some free wins with one of the most fun and rewarding champions to play. So until next time, peace. And today I'll be showing you how to play one of my personal favorite champions, the Lady of Clockwork Orianna. Carry yourself from any elo as the AD carry role. It's still the beginning of the new season, and that means new